Bigwater Fishing. You guys have probably seen our podcast, videos, fishing reports, whatever it may be. Hopefully you've seen our Project Boat series. That's actually turned out to be a 13-part series on rehabbing a 2004 Ranger that probably hadn't been taken care of as good as most people would like it to be. But what we're doing now is the final walkthrough and kind of showing you some of the stuff that we didn't get in little videos there, things that maybe kind of fell through the cracks, and then just an overall encompassing video of the Project Boat's final completion. Some people, it'd be hard to believe that this boat, even being 20 years old, never had a trolling motor on it. And so that actually made it a little bit easier. We had an open pallet, if you will, in order to put the trolling motor on. And I chose an Ultrex just because I like the foot pedal for stuff that we're going to do like this. This isn't going to be a boat that's going to go out 20 miles on Lake Erie, or at least not on a regular basis. And that way I had, with the Ultrex, an easier time to mount my 360. Ultimately, I'm going to put a Mega Live target lock on there. And we did it just by really simply, bolting through using a removable plate, a Minn Kota bracket. I think it's an MK52. Then also, because we want to make this fully adjustable, whether it's taking the cover off or what have you, we put the Minn Kota power plug on. It's the best plug that I have seen, and it just allows us to, disconnect the power very quickly with this and completely take the trolling motor off if necessary. So one thing, I'm kind of used to the big deck on my Ranger 622 and any of the 600 series I've had before. And this is a 618 Ranger, but it's a lot smaller up here. Obviously, it's a narrower boat. And I found real quick with the Ultrex foot pedal being here, and just the way I'm a pretty tall guy, that we really wanted to submerge this down and have a recessed foot pedal tray. And that took quite a bit of work because this boat was definitely not set up for that, and a lot of measurement and a little bit of finger crossing, because honestly we just didn't know how close things were underneath. We accessed the panel here and tried to do the best job we could of seeing what actually was there, but this was completely filled with foam that we had to dig out, and we got very close to some of the rod tubes and things, but it all worked out, and it's a much better package here that allows us to easier on the back and keeps that front deck a little cleaner. So on the front of the boat here, not having had a trolling motor electronics is kind of a blessing because we don't have holes and things we have to work around, but it's a little bit of a curse too, because this boat really wasn't designed for that type of stuff, and certainly not running the amount of graphs and power and things that we are, today. And 20 years ago, just a whole different ball game. So one of the things we started with was just taking this panel off, kind of sanding it up, giving it a little bit of paint. It makes it look an awful lot nicer in just a few minutes time. But we'll show you a little cutaway here where I built a panel that could hold the distribution panel and the network box for the Humminbird stuff. So we had to run a cable all the way back around there, and it was a crazy deal. Actually, this little panel over here with a light on it, that was actually, we put that in there. We cut a hole in the glass because we couldn't find any other way to dig through the foam and actually reach that area. There just wasn't other access points. So once we got this all put together, we had room to now mount all of our stuff. We put some little clamshells on here, some oversized clamshells for all of the wires. You can see we don't have the graphs hooked up today, but we've got this where we can run 3 Humminbird graphs, network, power cables, transducers, the whole kit and caboodle. So once this is on, it looks a lot more complete and nicer. And then that same point, when we accessed underneath this panel, I dug away the foam and we through bolted and put nice big backing plates on here for the Bert's Custom Tackle track. And that allows us to, have big graphs on there, but really a strong, nice firm connection and not just screwing into the glass. On the front of the boat, a lot of work here and a little amount of time. One thing that is a really simple but important piece of equipment is TH Marine, this trolling jacket, as they call it. It allows you to hide all the wires in there, not getting hooks and things in it. And once I get the target lock in, we're going to clean up some more of these wires even more so. And it's just a Velcro deal, so you can still get them out if something happens, pretty easily. It's not a big deal where you have to cut 100 zip ties. And I just put a zip tie on the top edge of this, and that held all of these wires in here for all of the stuff we have. When you start getting target lock, 360, all these transducers and power cables, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and the trolling motor jacket by TH Marine was an easy way to kind of hide them all together. So on the boat here, this was not on. A Ranger comes with a rear rail, but the front rail is an option this boat didn't have, and I actually traded a guy on Facebook that needed some rear rails from the boat that I currently have, because I use Bert's Custom Tackle track on all my stuff. The problem is this boat is so old, they were just different. The gunnels are so narrow. This is kind of before track is what it is today, and it just wouldn't mount on there, and there's too much curvature. So I used these rear front rails actually for a 600 series like my other boat, and they just kind of happened, even though they're off-centered a little bit, they worked really nice to be able to not only get rod holders on here, but as people are stepping in and out of the boat, it's nice to have these tying things off of it, whether it's bumpers, just not scratching your boat up, people throwing coolers and things on it. So I do like the rails for this, even though I'm a Burt's Custom Tackle track guy. It's just not applicable in the entire boat here. So we'll show you later in the boat where we also used it in the stern, but we've got them here to hold our electronics where we've got the room, but just not here. So lots of rod holder bases so we can move these things around, because this boat's going to be used for a lot of different stuff. You know, as you look at this nice marine flooring, you probably can't appreciate the literally probably hundreds of hours that we put into getting it to this point. And really it starts by backing up. And when we got the boat, we looked and stepped, you know, on a few compartments and saw that they were really soft. And so I didn't really know what to do, but fortunately my buddy Captain Chip Cartwright, the owner of Silver Streak Lures, had, you know, a good amount of experience with dealing with stuff like that on the bigger boats that those guys run. And so we cut the core out of almost all of these compartments, completely redid them, refilled them, and put them back together. And at that point then we actually had to call in a friend. We went into Vic Sports Center, and they had Drew from CarStar who hooked us up with, you know, showing us how to actually do this gel coat, and spraying it was the key. You know, rolling it on, brushing it on with the black as a solid color just wasn't going to work. And so once we had these compartments completely filled and basically, you know, rebuilt up, then we could start the process. But again, even throughout that, just taking the hinges off, you know, drilling out the rivets, riveting them on. There was a lot of work with this. And even before that, just getting the carpet off of them. Once we pulled that up, it was just a disaster, just pounds of dirt just going everywhere. And then removing the glue. Huge nightmare with trying to get that glue down to the original finished glass. I mean, it was quite a nightmare, to be honest. Probably the worst part of the project, and very, very time consuming. But once we got this flooring installed, we had Captain Bob and Captain Chris kind of help us, you know, install this, because it's almost like ordering decals. And once we got the flooring and had it all measured up, which they do, you know, digitally, we got this stuff, they mailed it to us, it was rolled up like decals, and we just laid this stuff out, and we kind of figured that out. Make sure you check out that video just on the flooring, and it'll show you what we did. Now, I chose a couple different things. I wanted something that wasn't going to be solid, so we kind of went with this lake map looking you know, layout here in a darker gray. The thing that I've learned in the process and talking with a lot of buddies is the really light colors are harder to keep clean. Go figure, right? So we wanted that, but we wanted a little bit of sponge too. So we've got the nice beveled edge and a fairly thick. You go too much thicker and your toes and things can kind of grab on it. So we did a lot of research on what type of flooring we wanted, but this has a little bit of sponge on it, where when you look at the lower part, this is typically what gets a lot of wear and tear here on the lower section of the boat. And so we went with a really hard material with that, and that's going to allow us to, you know, power wash it, clean it up, and not have stains or things get on it. We went with black for that as well. So the flooring was a huge project. You know, talking about it over a couple minutes, it literally took months to probably do this, as we worked on it here and there, and several friends, and ultimately some professional help. So once we had the carpet torn out and the floor panel exposed, which normally would not be because it's underneath the flooring, we took advantage to take that floor panel up, and we went through the gas tank. We sucked some stuff out of the gas tank that was junk. We took the old fuel out, we checked the fuel senders, and we actually had a fitting that was leaking on the gas tank on the top near the sender, and so we made a new gasket with that. And we put new seat bases in. We had one that was stuck, and you know, since we had them in there, we decided just to replace them all. And that's something you definitely don't want to do down the road, because we'd almost have to tear up some of the flooring simply because to access it where they're through bolted. Same thing goes for pumps. You know, there's a lot better access when you can tear everything apart, and we took the advantage with Captain Chris to redo all of the plumbing. You know, some of the flow rate stuff was not working. The gauges were really difficult to turn, and it was actually pretty inexpensive. And with everything torn out, we put some bilge cleaner down there, and we got all that junk out. It was really, really nasty in the bilge. We power washed inside the compartment there where the gas tank is at. And all of that stuff really made a big difference, because we didn't want to have new pumps and all new valves and things like that, and then wash all of that crud out of the boat and clog it right back up. You know, for a tiller boat, this is the command center or the console. And really this panel here, they had like drywall fittings in there because these screws had been stripped out. So we took a little bit of time to use some 4200 to basically tighten those holes back up so we could use a small screw. And that allowed us to, get that in there nice and firm. And at that point, what we also did was we just kind of sanded and painted this up a little bit because it was looking definitely a little rough through its years. And then on these gauges, we took the time to label everything before we took it apart. And that was really key because there was a lot of stuff going on there. And there were some things that were working and some things that weren't. And when you looked at some of the fittings, you saw some of them were green. A couple wires had actually pulled out. So in many cases, we actually put new waterproof fittings on there. It was just really a simple, inexpensive deal. And you don't want anything here not to work. I mean, we've got our bilge pumps, we've got our nav lights, our aerators, things like that that are working on this Ranger panel, which is really important. If those things were to go out, that would not be good. But then even things like, our cigarette lighter there that's going to allow us to charge our cell phone or what have you. And then we also added, this was a new deal, we added lights, which we did a whole thing and just on the light section. Here's our switch and here's a dimmer for the outside lights on the deck. And that allowed us, if we're night fishing, to just have just a little bit of light or have a whole lot. And one of the other things we did is I kind of got rid of a lot of the gauges because a lot of that stuff was outdated. Like, I didn't care about the speedometer, so we got rid of that. And in its place, I had a Mercury SmartCraft gauge put in. That's going to allow me to tell the hours that are on that motor, so it's going to make it a lot easier, digitally at home to know, hey, do I need to do an oil change or where are we at? It's going to allow me to see all the diagnosis stuff, gallons burned even, because again, some of these fuel gauges aren't always amazing. And so just about anything, I rely on the SmartCraft on all my boats, and I definitely wanted one on this one as well. Sometimes it's just cleaning things up a little bit. Sometimes it's actually really makes a big deal. And then when we had this panel off, we took the advantage of, we put our Ethernet box, kind of hiding a lot of the wires and things for the electronics that we have here. We hid those down there. We cleaned up a lot of the connections and how the wires were actually wired, or kind of snaked through there. And then we through bolted some birch track, and that's nice because it's a good firm connection here. We put a little backing plate on there and some big washers in some cases, and that allowed me to put two. I couldn't decide where I wanted them, so I said, heck, we'll put 2 rows on there, and that way we can move these graphs pretty much in any direction and have things. And you can put little accessories in there too. You can put cup holders and all kinds of good stuff in there, the whole little knickknacks, sinkers, and what have you. And then that allowed me really a nice place to mount 3 12-inch Helix units. And again, the best thing about these Bert's Custom Tackle risers that we have is you can slide that stuff in and out, you can lock them in place. They're really a firm, rigid connection, and move them around. Again, this is kind of the cockpit or the command center of when you're fishing in a tiller boat, and a lot of those guys don't hardly even get up. And so I found these couple little Rapala tool holders, which they have an adhesive back or you can screw them in. And so I just through bolted them and then put a couple screws into the starboard here to hold these. And it's kind of nice because they're magnetic, so they hold these tools and they're not going to fall over, even though I got a lot of different types. And that keeps that stuff readily handy, but yet not all over getting caught in the net and all that good stuff. And really an inexpensive, kind of nice little modification. One of the first things we did in the bilge area was basically remove everything. They had a little piece of starboard back here with a charger on it, and that was outdated, the batteries, so we pretty much just gutted everything in there, and we ran a ton of bilge cleaner in here multiple times because it was just the grim and the grime. And this is when Captain Chris helped me. We replaced all of these fittings and all of this plumbing. And some of them, they had kinks on them that I think were probably there from the manufacturer. They just didn't have quite a long enough hose, and so we just simply replaced a small section of hose, and we immediately had better flow on some of our pump outs and things like that. But then also we took the time to put these new pumps themselves in, and then we labeled everything, front, rear, all of the gauges. We put new fittings in here so we didn't have any issues. There's a whole video just on this. New bilge pumps, things that were really going to be important to us. We had a few fittings that were loose in here and actually were taking water on. And again, with Captain Chip, that was a pretty short deal. We used some 5200 in just a short bit of time to fit that up. And once we got all that stuff done, then we kind of started building out in there. We through bolted our onboard chargers. So we got the Minn Kota precision charger. I actually have 6 batteries in this boat, which I'll get to in a second. But we through bolted these, which is important so they're not bouncing around. And we put little starboard behind each piece there so that we have flow, and you don't have, you can get more air around that. So that's one thing that I would tell you to do, and you're not going to get the moisture that holds on those, which can cause problems over the time. And a lot of it was just little things. Like we took quite a bit of time to see all the zip ties here, went and redid, and it took actually a fair amount of time because in some cases we had to disconnect some things to get all of these, you know, hoses and things put together so it not only looks nicer, but if we had to get it something, it's much easier. So on the battery setup, we really have three different things kind of going on here. We've got the trolling motor batteries, we've got my cranking battery, and then if you watched any of our stuff, you know I have a separate electronics battery. And really the difference between this and my boat is space. So we don't have nearly the space. This boat was not designed for 6 batteries whatsoever, and there wasn't even trolling motor batteries, you know, in it at the time. So really could have been an issue, but fortunately Dakota Lithium makes a huge capacity battery, 135 amp hours, dual purpose, in a very small platform. And at the time I had to have some custom trays made, but since we've even, you know, started this process, Dakota Lithium now offers a custom small tray, which would have worked here for me, and made a big deal because you need a way to secure those batteries both legally and just realistically, and a regular size tray just has too big of a platform, at least in this tight quarters, that I wasn't going to be able to fit those in. So in one area that was designed for 2 batteries, I actually have 3 Dakota Lithium batteries for just my trolling motor, and they're about double the capacity of what those traditional batteries would be. And then here on the port side, we've got an oversized cranking battery, which is the same one that I like to use on my Ranger 622. And then I put 2, tie them together, series 135 Dakota Lithium Pluses for just my electronics. And that's going to give me a ton of power, and it's going to give me, you know, a lot of extra range, because places I may go with this or kind of intend on going, I may not be able to charge this boat for a day or 2 or 3. And so that's going to make a big difference. And also just making sure I have clean power. So we don't want to run those things on anything else. If you've seen our other videos on electronics and how we have such clean pictures, a lot of that starts with good, clean power, heavy wire connections, heat shrinking, and all that good stuff. So in that back compartment, it is absolutely jam-packed full of stuff there, and we're able to fit that in only because of those Dakota Lithiums. But accessing it was going to be another thing, and we wanted easy access, so that kind of brought us to the next part of the project boat. You know, so when we got the project boat, there was actually some starboard panels back here that you had to unscrew and take out in order to gain a small access panel to these batteries. And you know, you don't want to hoist these batteries in and out or being able to not access or see if a connection or something's messed up. And so we knew we wanted to change that. So we took that starboard off, and we actually had Tommy at Vic Sports Center and Drew fill those holes in and fiberglass them in part of the series here when we did the lid covers. And basically TH Marine, they've got a really nice waterproof hatch cover. This is actually the same one that's in my Ranger 622 in the rear splash well. And we made that opening, me and B-Team Bob, we cut a big hole in the boat. It was kind of one of those measure 5-time deals, but it's so much better because now we can not only get these batteries in and out, but we don't have to open this access panel or have to pull one out to get at another one. We can see the fittings, the connections. You can get at everything, and it's just a whole lot nicer. And you could even have some storage in there too. I know I've seen some drop down boxes and things that guys use because there is a little bit extra storage space here. But for me, it was all about access. On the battery side here for the trolling motor, these things lock right in, nice and seals. They look good. You can still stand on them. And then we did the same thing over on the port side. So we made a TH Marine cutout here panel for this access, no different than we did on the starboard side. The difference here, it was our cranking battery, and we've got our 2 electronic batteries that we tied together, you know, positive to positive, negative to negative. But I also took the time here to make a distribution panel, and I made that board out of yellow starboard so I could see it real easy and actually install all the stuff together. So we've got 2 different distribution panels and 2 different battery switches. One is for the cranking battery and that distribution panel, and so everything in the boat can be shut off. Nothing could accidentally be left on or anything running or anything over time, especially since I'm not going to use this boat as much as I probably would like to. And so we can shut that off, and then we have everything labeled here in these little blue C distribution panels. And then we did the same thing for the electronics. And one of the key parts of this is having, again, heavy tin copper wire, having heat shrink connections, having heavy wire even from the distribution panel to the shutoff. So we're having good clean power to our Dakota Lithium electronics only batteries, and having nothing else on this but the electronics. That's one of the ways that you get a much clearer picture. And then also having the shutoff here so that, again, when we're away from the boat, we don't have a drawdown with all of the different things that we have in here. You'd be amazed at the things that have a draw, even though you don't think they do if they're shut off. So having a shutoff and having a distribution panel, everything right together, nice, clean, it's going to be a much more efficient deal. We don't have a million fuse holders all over the place, and it's actually really ready readily accessible. So if you do have an issue, we can get at it or check at it very easily. You know, so lights were a really important part of this boat to me. I really wanted to be able to fish in low light conditions, if not even just use this for night fishing. You know, obviously I have another boat that we use for most of our day-to-day business, but I wanted something smaller to get in and kind of sneak into some smaller lakes or maybe just even night fish. And so putting some toggle lights on. We used some TH Marine lights, and we ordered black to match and kind of fit in here. And these are really nice because they had a lot of different mounting options, from adhesive to screwing in. And in most cases, I tried to through bolt them where possible with these little end caps. And when you turn these on, I wanted to have a dimmer switch. So you can see, even though in the middle of the day, you can see that light, and then we just dim that right off to nothing. So that if I'm tying knots, you know, I'm not blowing my eyes out, but if I need more light, we're gonna have more light. And then inversely, I wanted some white lights for inside the compartments, especially some of the compartments that have, you know, a white gel coat in there. It really kind of blows that up and allows you to see everything. So whether I'm in the rod locker, in the back here, one of the things we did, we added a couple white lights in the back where all of the batteries and things are at. And that way I can see that stuff if there was an issue. You know, so many times those compartments do not have a light in them, and that's actually where you need it, so you can make sure you take care of any issue that you do have. You know, about halfway through the boat's life, the original owner did upgrade motors and had a motor on there that actually worked fine. It wasn't that old, the hours were not crazy, but we just kind of figured we're going to keep this thing for a while, and we upgraded the motor. The max that you can have on this is a 90 horse. So we went with a 90 horse Mercury, which was going to be the max, and the nice new tiller. You know, it's a little bit upgrade since that motor had been around, and we went with the command thrust. So that was going to give us a little bit better situation because, you know, this boat's pretty heavy, and 90 horse, you know, a lot of guys wish that they would have had a larger horsepower rating at that point, but they don't. But one thing that, you know, reason a lot of guys don't like the tillers is, you know, whether it's safety or comfort, you know, you're taking your hand off that handle, that's a bad deal. And so we found a product by U-Flex that bolts on right here. We actually had Vicks do that when they installed the motor. And we basically just take a small section of the Mercury tiller off, and we bolted this right on, and it's a self-contained hydraulic system, so we don't have to worry about power, where a lot of the different models that we kind of looked at require a ton of power, and we didn't want to go that direction. So the self-contained hydraulic system is really nice. You quite literally can take your hand off of that running down the lake. Don't recommend it, but if you do, the boat's not going to do a 360 tailspin. So that's a really nice feature that makes it a lot easier to use, especially if you don't have quite the arm strength that you used to. So on the Mercury here, we went with the command thrust lower unit, and that allows me to run a little bit bigger prop situation, getting me some better torque and low end. This is actually a Rev Series prop, just like I use on my big Ranger 622 with a 400 Verado. We also went with the Mercury cover. This is actually right from Mercury. That's nice. It keeps things from getting scratched up and dirty, not having to clean it nearly as much. And it's a vented cover that is meant to be on. We get that question all the time. This is meant to be on while running down the lake. Well, having used the Talon, you guys have seen the videos for a number of years on my Ranger 621 and 622. I knew I couldn't be without it in the tiller boat because this will probably get used even more. Whether it's docking at remote ramps, or when you don't have docks actually in, or actually being able to hold, because this will actually go down a full 15 feet. So a lot of the bodies of water that I plan on fishing with this boat, that's actually going to get me on bottom and almost be like anchoring. So in some cases, we've already used this. We're on a little teaser with conjunction on our spot lock when we're holding in one individual place and a really stiff wind. So we went with the same deal. We went with a jack plate mount and the tilt bracket and a quick disconnect so that this can come off for whatever reason, whether it's maintenance, needing it off for just about any reason. The key here would be we used a spacer. So we'll producer to show you a little cutaway here on, because we don't have a jack plate on this boat. Definitely not required. So we have a little spacer on the backside so we could still use this same mount. And this is going to be flip-flop back on my other boat if necessary. So a lot of guys may not even know what these are, these splash guards. This boat, a lot of the guys, especially if you're a Minnesota guy or something like that, you're back trolling with this boat. So when you're going backwards, you can imagine the amount of water that would want to come in the back of the boat. And so that's why you have this guard. This is set up with a static bracket just like I have in my 622, so the guy can put an electric motor or really anything on this. And that's why you have this little cutout. The other side you do not. And I really contemplated when I saw this, just honestly taking them off, throwing them out and having new ones done or nothing. because they were really trashed. But like so many things on the project boat, or really anything that you guys are working on, if you take a little bit of time to clean things up, I just completely took these apart, and as it turns out, they really weren't installed properly, or at least the last time they were taken off. And so I re-riveted some of the rubber back on, cleaned things up, trimmed them a little bit, cleaned these up, just took a little bit of a wheel to them, and then just painted the metal part that is the base here. And that really made it look a lot nicer. And then also just taking some of the rivets that were in there, and where there really was a lot of wear, I put a through bolt on there. And a couple down here had either zinc or something else, and they were really rusted heavily. So just replace those with some stainless hardware, and that made a big difference in not only the appearance but the function. They're more rigid now and where they need to be. So whether you're back trolling with this, or if you're probably taking out on Lake Erie a day, maybe you shouldn't, it's going to reduce the amount of water that's going to get into the back end of this boat and make you a lot safer, a lot drier. So when I bought this boat originally, there was a transducer board on there, and those transducers were not in what I would call the proper spot, and definitely not with what I wanted to do. So we let that guy keep all those transducers, and we moved what would be our skimmer or high speed down here in the bottom. And we talked about earlier with the roller there in subsequent videos about why we changed that out so we could access this. Well, we also had to put a piece of starboard in there to get away from the drains and the bunk so that we could flushly mount this 2D skimmer. This is the same type deal that I use on my 622, and it's so important for me to mark fish at speed, and so we wanted that right in the same spot. Now I did make a little bit of an extension. This is a Bird's Custom Tackle transducer board, and we kind of cut an angle on it, and so we kind of made that look good, and we installed it just above the bottom of the boat. And this way we could have our mega side imaging, down imaging, and also 2D, even though they're hooked up on a Y cable. Thank you for watching the project boat kind of wrap up. There's a lot of things that I've learned through this, and one of them is you don't have to be a master mechanic to do a lot of these tasks. A lot of them are just cleaning things up, a little bit of learning, doing some YouTubing, hopefully watching our series that shows a lot of these things in detail. But really, knowing when to get the professionals involved is the key. Especially, you can actually save a lot of time and even more money by having it done right the first way. And that's where Vic Sports Center and Drew at CarStar were so important on those projects, and even my buddy Captain Chip on the individual things. But tackle the things that you can, even if it's the messy stuff, because that's what's going to save you a lot of money. But hopefully you guys watched the individual project boat series itself. There was 13 parts of in-depth of the stuff that we kind of just went over here. And really, I hope it helps guys do their own project, jumpstart, maybe get into rehabbing a boat. It doesn't have to be 20 years old, or adding some new stuff on. Maybe it's just adding a trolling motor onto a fairly new boat. But regardless, I'd like to take this time to thank all the people that helped me, and I'm sure we're probably going to forget some because there was so many of you. But Vic Sports Center, Drew over at CarStar with the gel coat work, Captain Chip Cartwright, Captain Bob, Captain Chris, TH Marine, Dakota Lithium, Minn Kota, Humminbird, Ranger, and Mercury Outboards. And I'm sure a slew of others. Hopefully we didn't forget you, but we appreciate all the things that you guys did, and for all of you for tuning in. And with that said, I think it's time that we get this thing on the water.